No, sir, I am not a communist, and I think that the red herring and so forth is rather ridiculous to toss into this conversation.
Then are you a Marxist?
Well, I have studied Marxist philosophy, yes, sir, and also other philosophers.
But are you a Marxist? I think you did admit on an earlier radio interview that you consider yourself a Marxist.
Well, I would very definitely say that I am a Marxist. That is correct. But that does not mean, however, that I'm a communist.
What is the difference between the two?
Well, there's a great deal of difference. Several American parties in several countries are based on Marxism, such as Ghana. Certain countries have characteristics of a socialist system, such as Great Britain with its socialized medicine. These, then, are the differences between an outright communist country and countries which adhere to leftist or Marxist principles.
In your work with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, what are you advocating?
We advocate restoration of diplomatic, trade, and tourist relations with Cuba.
I'm confused.
Whoa.
I'm confused. I thought Bill O'Reilly said this is a rube who couldn't put two words together.
Let me tell you something. He's so eloquent in these debates, which people go listen to the debates. There's actually two of them. There's one that's on the Mary Farrell Foundation. That's the original one, the interview with Bill Stuckey from a show called Latin Listening Post, which was not the week, but about 4 days before that debate. There's so much to unpack here. There's so many people involved. There's so much stuff going on. This is, of course, a lone nut, as you're well aware, who has no friends and is completely illiterate and dyslexic. However, like most lone nut assassins, he did a lot of TV. He did a lot of radio. He debated people on radio. I haven't even done this, and I've been around for a lot longer than Oswald. This is some summer of love that he has in 1963. Just to go over what you saw in that video before I forget, that is filmed by WDSU, which is the NBC affiliate in New Orleans. It's owned by Edgar and Edith Stern, who are the heirs to the Sears fortune. They are virulent anti-communists who will work with Ed Butler. Here are the Sterns, very wealthy people. They are two of the people who are contacted by Ed Butler and this group of anti-communists we're going to go over on this show. Whether Oswald was in on this or not is debatable even to this day. We don't really know, but we could go over what's in that video, because in that video that you just saw at the beginning are the Cubans, including Carlos Bringuier, the anti-Castro Cubans who are showing up to court after having a fight with Oswald on the streets in New Orleans. That's Carlos Bringuier, who is a virulent anti-Castro Cuban. He's the head of the DRE, which was the Student Directorate Revolutionary Group, anti-Castro group that was funded by the CIA. It was a CIA cutout, Revolutionary Student Directorate. He was in a clothing store. He worked in a clothing store, and Oswald came in a couple of weeks before and gave him that manual that you see at the beginning of that film. Just to break it down for people, nobody knows what's in that film, so I'm going to explain it so everyone understands finally, because I know everything that's going on in that film footage, and it's a couple of events sewn together by NBC. So Oswald came in, and he was with this manual in his hand, and it's his Cuban. I mean, it's his a Marine manual on guerrilla warfare. And he talks to Bringuier in this clothing store, and he says, I can help you fight against Castro. He said, I am an ex-Marine. I am trained in warfare, guerrilla warfare. I can help train your men. I can fight with you if you want, or I could give you my manual, which he does. And he gives that manual to Carlos Bringuier. Carlos Bringuier says, okay, that's great. So a couple of days later on Canal Street by the Trade Mart, there's another event that happens. And what you saw was a group of men who showed up, and WDSU was tipped off that Oswald was passing out leaflets that were they were pro-Castro in nature. This was that he was the secretary for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So Bringuier and those guys that you see at the beginning of the video clip, a film clip, actually 68 millimeter, show up and they get into a shoving match with Oswald. They're all arrested by the police. The news crew is there even before the police are. Oswald is taken down and he is arrested. And when asked who they should contact, Oswald says, contact FBI agent Quigley. He'll get me out. This is actually the mugshot from that event of Oswald, who tells the New Orleans police officer to contact FBI agent Quigley. Astonishingly, they do contact Quigley, and Quigley, the FBI agent, gets Oswald out of jail. Interestingly enough, there's some bail involved, but what you're seeing in that film is Oswald going to court and these Cubans going to court for that event. That was his trial. That was October 12th. That was August 12th, 1963. The event took place on August 9th, 1963, when Oswald is arrested for disturbing the peace. He will plead not guilty in that case. He'll be found guilty by the judge and fined $10, which he pays with the help of somebody else. You know, $10 is like 100, right, Eric? For 1963, 10,
something like that. Sure.
Okay, so I mean, it's not that small change. So August 12th, that's what happened. Oswald, in that particular, the final thing, the audio track, is him from the actual radio debate from August 21st, 1963, which is a week later. But on August 17th, a few days before, there's a show called Latin Listening Post, hosted by a cat named Bill Stuckey, who we're going to get into in a second. Bill Stuckey is a CIA asset. He's a radio journalist who interviews Oswald for a 36-minute broadcast that we'll post on Locals for members only after the show. It's pretty rare. This is not part of it. I have the full 36-minute interview with Oswald talking about Marxism, talking about the difference between communism and Marxism, talking about British socialized medicine as an example of socialism and Marxism. And he delineates all this stuff brilliantly in both interviews, both debates. The second one is a debate. And they've already gotten the word out that this guy has an organization called Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So that's why what you're seeing there at the end is from the actual debate. And that is organized by the subject of our show today, Edward Scannell Butler. I don't know if you have a picture of Butler, but Butler is really what we, excuse me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. So Butler is a New Orleans-born advertising executive, not unlike Lansdale, but he's domestic. He's the domestic version of Lansdale. And he comes out of the advertising world and he's born in New Orleans, 1934, but he joins the Army Management School. And I don't know what the actual Army Management School is, but my guess is the PSYOPs or propaganda division, and maybe somebody knows better than I do. I always assumed it was the PSYOPs division of the Army, because he only goes for like 2 years at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And then he completes the course, and next thing you know, he's working at an ad agency in New Orleans. I think Brown Friedman or something. But he becomes friendly with a guy named Clay Shaw. Clay Shaw and him bond together at the hip at the International Trade Mart. And what they set up is two groups. One is the Free Voice of Latin America. Another one's called the American Institute for Freedom Project. And both of these are run by this guy, plus an old friend of the show, Guy Banister. So we now we'll begin to see this murderer's row put together of every single person in New Orleans of the Oswald story. A guy will show up from Mexico City. This is, of course, Guy Banister. A guy shows up, that's Guy Banister, but another guy shows up from Mexico City named David Atlee Phillips. David Atlee Phillips oversees this entire operation. David Atlee Phillips oversees Guy Banister, who oversees Clay Shaw. And there's a picture of Maurice Bishop on the left, the alias of David Atlee Phillips on the right. David Atlee Phillips will famously say on his deathbed to his own brother when he dies, weeping, that he was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963. So you could draw your own conclusions to that. Another guy in this operation is a guy who sets up the Information Council of America called INCA, I-N-C-A, 1961. That is a guy named Alton Ochsner. Alton Ochsner is one of the biggest doctors in New Orleans. He runs the Ochsner Clinic. He is looking for a cure for cancer. Ochsner comes out of the, I want to say like the Midwest German extraction, originally from South Dakota. And he's a German whose brother was a famous surgeon who set up the American College of Surgeons. This is a family of really prominent medical people. Ochsner himself will be the first doctor to make the connection between cancer and smoking. He will literally start the American Cancer Association. He will literally connect smoking and cancer and begin to work on cures and dissuasions for people smoking. On the other side, he is a guy getting a lot of money from the CIA. He is, in a weird way, the doctor to the dictators, Eric. He is assigned by us to take care of, I know this is odd. He is assigned by us to take care of the health of every dictator in Central and South America. They fly these guys in for years. And I'm talking about Somoza out of Nicaragua, Juan Perón out of Argentina, all the dictators, which they don't perceive them or care that they're dictators. All they care about is that they're holding the wall against communism, Eric. So these guys aren't perceived like the left perceives them as evil dictators. They want to keep these guys alive, whether they're a military dictator or a civilian dictator or just a strong man or whatever the hell's going on. Ochsner's job, one of his jobs, is to keep these dictators in perfect health. So he is given money by yet another guy who's his benefactor, named Clint Murchison Sr. out of Dallas. So Clint, all of these people are now coming together. Murchison, or they say Murchison down there in Dallas, depending on who you talk to, Sr. is the funder for Ochsner and his political maneuverings. Okay, who is funding Clint Murchison? Well, there's another guy named Patrick Frawley. And Patrick Frawley is a guy who will become, he was born in Nicaragua, actually, Frawley, and his stuff was his father was a banker and a heavy duty cat. He will become he'll purchase the Bing Crosby house, actually, in Los Angeles at one point. There's Patrick Frawley. He will have served in the Canadian Air Force during World War II. He married a Canadian. He owns something called Gillette Razors. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Turned the company into something called Papermate. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. And he invents the Schick razor. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Unfortunately for Patrick Frawley, he becomes an alcoholic and has to go to this obscure drug and alcohol rehab up in Washington State called Shadle. And Shadle becomes a chain of rehabs that operate under the premise of what's it called when you do something bad like a mouse and you hit them over the head with something? Not sensory deprivation, where you're treated. In other words, this is really weird. It later became Schick Shadle because he bought the franchise and he turned into Schick-Shadle rehabs. But their premise for recovery is, I'll just tell you what they did. They would let you drink as much as you wanted in the rehab. They had a full bar. And their theory was, no, I swear to God, their theory was you'd get sick of drinking and it would become an antagonist to you.
Aversion therapy?
Aversion therapy, right. Thank you.
Sorry. It took me a while to.
No, I was like, their policy was aversion therapy. I think they might barely be in existence now. I'm not really sure. But they would put like incredible, disgusting things like old pieces of pork in your drink. They would allow you to drink nonstop in a bar that was in the rehab setup, a phony bar. Anyway, he goes to this place and buys it. Go ahead.
Is that the theory with anabuse as well?
Yeah, anabuse was part of that theory, and also aversion therapy, which has since been disproven as a method. But in the 50s and 60s, Shadle was one of the top rehabs in the country. Okay, so you got all these guys involved. Frawley will have, not to be confused with William Frawley. This is Patrick Frawley. William Frawley is Fred Mertz from I Love Lucy. And a lot of times they say William Frawley, which is not the case. This is Patrick Frawley, who is like the Howard Hughes of politics. I mean, he backs not only Ochsner and Clint Murchison's, but he also backs Sam Rayburn. He backs Douglas MacArthur. He's friends with Nelson Rockefeller. He backs the political aspirations of somebody named Richard Nixon. He is involved in so much stuff, backing the Panamanian government. There's Murchison. Yeah. They are thick as thieves, the two. This is a guy who's educated in San Francisco, drops out of college at 18, but is a smart businessman. And again, totally anti-communist, which is the theme of all these people. There's a woman working for Alton Ochsner on research about cancer, and her name is Mary Sherman. Mary Sherman is virulently anti-communist and anti-Castro. She will be killed. This is Mary Sherman. She will be burnt to death in her apartment in her house in New Orleans, I believe, by a guy who was arrested, who I think was Cuban intelligence, who assassinated her. I think it was more an assassination than anything else. Somebody broke into her house, set it on fire, stabbed her. There's some dispute as to whether she was lasered to death, or I think that's an exaggeration. But nevertheless, Mary Sherman was a cancer researcher for Ochsner to come up not with stuff to kill Castro, but actually cures for cancer, for smoking and everything else. Now, David Ferry will take this in another direction with his mice experiments and begin to try to come up with some harebrained scheme to inject Castro with a cancer cell shot. Maybe it is created later because we have Jolly West injecting Jack Ruby with something years later. So who knows? But Ochsner's legit and Mary Sherman is legit. All of these people are completely above ground, well-known people in New Orleans in that community. And they all have one thing in common, and that's anti-communism. So in the summer of 1963, if you could just recap what Oswald is doing in the summer of 1963, let's start off on July 27th, 1963. Where is he then? Well, he drives to Mobile, Alabama, where he speaks on life in the Soviet Union at Spring Hill College for his cousin, Eugene Muret, which is what lone assassins do. They give lectures and seminars on life in other countries. So he speaks before these Jesuits at Spring Hill College. That's July 27, 1963. Now, who speaks there after him? A week later, it's a speaker series. Let me put it that way. A speaker series. So a week later, they have Clay Shaw speaking there about the International Trade Mart. Here he is driving over to the Spring Hill College gig. That's actually from the trial of Clay Shaw. But nevertheless, Clay Shaw speaks a week later after Oswald speaks at Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama. Odd? Well, or God. So, okay, so August 9th, Oswald's arrested in this fight. I think around August 7th is when he gives him the manual. August 12th is the trial. August 17th, he gives this interview with Bill Stuckey of Latin Listening Post. Now, here's what Edward Scannell Butler creates. He creates a series of truth tapes. These are audio tapes like Voice of America, Eric, that are sent out to 130 radio stations in Central and South America to play on the radio. So he's got a production thing in that studio where they're producing these tapes. He will later produce a version of the debates and sell it commercially after the assassination of Oswald, the killing of Oswald and the killing of Kennedy. This is called Oswald's Self-Portrait in Red, which this is the CD cover right here. And on the back, you see Butler himself, Alton Oxner, and a guy named Hale Boggs. Now, Hale Boggs will come into play here because Hale Boggs, that's a good one. Okay. Hale Boggs on the bottom left is the congressman from New Orleans. He will be figured into this storyline a little bit because Hale Boggs, it will not end well for Hale Boggs. Let me put it that way. But there is this debate that goes on. I don't know if you could play a little selection from the debate from that night at WDSU in New Orleans. Let me just tell you who's there. It's Bill Slatter, who's the host. He's a straight guy. He's the radio show voice host. Then you've got Bill Stuckey, who is a CIA asset, and he works very closely with Ed Butler. And then you've got Carlos Bringuier. So Carlos, it's really 4-on-1 against Oswald. It's an amazing mismatch, but Oswald handles himself really well in this 4-on-1 debate, which maybe we could hear a little bit of a clip of that.
To Ed Butler, Executive Vice President of INCA, the Information Council of the Americas,
this is Hale Boggs, right?
who developed much new material on Oswald's movements and activities, not only in New Orleans, but elsewhere. Let me say a word about the purposes of INCA, the organization which Mr. Butler directs. I have taken a very personal interest in INCA, as I said, a private organization which originated in my own congressional district. On September 17, 1962, I said to my colleagues in Congress that INCA is actively engaged in the defeat of the communist movement through its Truth Tapes program, a program which provides scores of
All right, now I wanted to see that with INCA because that's something you're going to be talking about.
Yeah, I don't know if you could jump ahead or.
Yeah, I'm going to.
Okay.
Both in a few college campuses. Recently, however, attempts have been made to organize a chapter here in New Orleans.
This is Bill Stuckey, by the way.
Line of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And now I'll give you a very brief digest of some of the principal propaganda lines. I use the word propaganda as rather, I should say, informational lines of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Number one, the principal thing that...
You like how he loads that in? Propaganda, I should say.
Right. The whole debate is loaded in, but I mean, it doesn't faze Oswald. None of this phases him.
But they insist is that Castro's government today is completely free and independent and is in no way controlled by the Soviet Union. Another cardinal point of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee's propaganda is that Premier Castro was forced to seek aid from the Russians only because the United States government refused to offer him financial aid. And following another line, I asked Mr. Oswald if he had ever or was a member of the American Communist Party, and he said that the only organization to which he belonged was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Mr. Oswald also gave me this rundown on his personal background. He said that he was a native of New Orleans, had attended Beauregard Junior High School and Warren Eastern High School, had entered the U.S. Marine Corps in 1956.
Let me see if I can skip and get some Oswald.
That is correct, and I think the fact that I did live for a time in the Soviet Union gives me excellent qualifications to repudiate charges that Cuba and the Fair Play for Cuba Committee is communist controlled.
Let me just interrupt for 1 second so I can fill this in for people.
Sure.
Just so I can fill this in. They are claiming that they're bushwhacking him. This is their claim to fame, is that they ambush Oswald by, in the middle of the debate, laying on him that he lived in the Soviet Union. Thereby, he's a stooge of the Soviets, and that the Soviets are linked to Castro, and this whole thing is a facade for him. However, as Oswald says, I did go over there. I never defected, and I'm back here now. It's proving the point that I am here in the United States. Why would they let a defector back into the United States if I had renounced my U.S. citizenship, as Butler implies in the debate quite arrogantly, when we get to hear Butler. Oswald says, I did go over there, but it was in every single paper. They're reading it from the Washington Post as if they've uncovered the Rosetta Stone or something, Eric. It's bizarre. I mean, they're finding it in the New York Times in 1959, Washington Post, 1959, 57 rather, and then his return to the United States like a year before. Anyway, we could play a little bit more of that maybe just to catch people up on this.
I'd like to dispute that point.
Well, I want to know exactly the name of the organization that you represent here in the city, because I have some confusion. Is Fair Play for Cuba Committee or Fair Play for Russia Committee?
This is
well, that is, of course, very provocative and question. I don't think it requires an answer.
Well, I will tell you why. Because before the communists take over Cuba, Cuba was at the head of the Latin American countries. And I can show you that in Cuba, in 1958, every 37 persons has an automobile, and in Russia was 200 persons.
He just gives these CIA stats
which are weird, because he's saying how many cars they have, how many telephones they have, how many televisions.
He's been fed this, Bringuier. He doesn't have access to any stuff. This is all CIA stuff. But if you could jump a little bit past Bringuier, I think Oswald does away with Bringuier pretty quickly.
One telephone for every price in dollars of Russia, and the people of Cuba who is leaving Cuba every day, who is escaping from Cuba every day, they even reflect more facts and figures from responsibility.
Well, in order to give a clear and concise and short answer to each of those, well, let's say questions, I would say that the facts and figures from a country like Pakistan or Burma would even reflect more light upon Cuba in relation to how many television sets and how many radios and all that.
He's saying you could do this with any country, Eric.
A subject to be discussed tonight. The Fair Play for Cuba Committee, as the name implies, is concerned primarily with Cuban-American relations.
How many people do you have on your committee here?
I did think about that a little, that it was disingenuous, because who gives a shit about... I could see cars, maybe like radios and televisions. I'm like,
well, not only that, they're comparing Cuba to Russia, to the Soviet Union.
Right.
I mean, it's kind of apples and oranges, isn't it?
Kind of. It's just weird.
Yeah. I mean, he deflects, or not deflects. He really explores some of these questions in great detail, but he's trying to keep the focus. And politely, they say, what's his name? Slatter says, Mr. Oswald is right. We're here tonight to discuss the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, of which he's the secretary of. And this is not really fair, to go into his background in the Soviet Union. But Butler does it anyway. He says, what did you do there? And he says, well, I had a job and I worked. And he said,
did you get a pension from the state?
Oh, did you get a pension? He says, no, I had a job and I worked. And he says, did you renounce your U.S. citizenship by turning in your passport? And he says, no, I never did. He says, the proof is in the pudding. I'm back here now. I mean, it's really interesting. They believe that they're ambushing him. And historically, they've always said that they really, ambushed him at this debate, which is not true. It's just not true. He's 23 years old, for Christ's sakes, and he's making monkeys out of all of them in a 4-on-1 debate.
Yeah, he's very well informed. I mean, he says a few times, but his knowledge is solid. I mean, he's well spoken. He obviously has his facts together. Doesn't seem
he's not rattled at all.
It doesn't seem rattled or overwhelmed in any way.
I mean, this is live radio, Eric. I mean, in New Orleans. I mean, it's pretty impressive what he's doing here. Now, whether he believes it or not, or whether this is part of his job, is open to debate, because he will not be around much longer after this to explain himself. After November 22nd. So,
and by the way, good point about live radio, because live radio now compared to then, I mean, back then there was only 3 channels on the television.
Yeah.
Very few radio stations to even appear on radio at all. It's kind of a big damn deal.
Well, again, this is because the radio and television station is owned by the same couple, Edith Stern and Edgar Stern, the heirs to the Sears fortune. And they're the ones that are working with Ed Butler to get this out there. They want to dismantle this organization before it gets started. Now, he's the secretary and he's the only member, but he has written a letter This is kind of interesting, to V.T. Lee. V.T. Lee is the president of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. And college campuses across the country, you know, whatever you want to talk about today, many colleges had Fair Play for Cuba committees on their campus in America. Columbia University, UCLA, they all had Fair Play for Cuba. What he's trying to do is set up for the first time a Fair Play for Cuba committee in New Orleans. So he's just getting started 2 weeks before this. He's incorporated it, and they're ridiculing him, saying, tell us all your members. And he's the only member because he just got started, literally. So he says, I wrote a letter to V.T. Lee in New York to get the permission to start this chapter of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee here. And he says, I don't care about Russia. This has nothing to do with the Soviet Union. This is about the United States government relationship to the sovereign nation of Cuba, for whatever that's worth, right? This debate will go on for 55 more years about Cuba and the United States. This is the beginning of it. August 1st, he writes a letter to V.T. Lee in New York saying I should be the secretary of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. Why? Because I've already taken on these anti-Castro Cubans by fighting them in the streets of New Orleans and getting arrested, which is odd because the letter is written August 1st and the fight doesn't happen until August 9th, which is really... Yes, I think he was either in a time machine or he was writing about something that hadn't happened yet that he was going to put together in a couple of days. But that letter is quite revealing as to being a phony letter, which he does send to V.T. Lee. But, you know, it's interesting because Butler says in 1967, he reverses himself in an interview. Maybe he slipped up, I don't know. But Butler reverses himself in 1967, and he said Oswald was a scapegoat, just like Vanderloob was in the Reichstag fire, that they were exactly the same thing, that they were scapegoats used by other forces. So I think he flips the switch years later. But Butler will team up with these other guys out in Oxnard to go after Jim Garrison in 1966, 1967, and try to undermine him in 1964 till the Clay Shaw trial. They're the ones, Oxnard and Butler, who begin to smear Garrison locally as being insane. That's where this comes from Butler and Oxnard working together. They despise Jim Garrison and they try to destroy him. But that being said, the WDSU interview that you're hearing, which we will put on Locals afterwards, is really important, and I'll tell you why. Before Oswald's even arrested, after his name comes out in the assassination of JFK 2 months later, this guy grabs his reel-to-reel giant tape recorder, Edward Butler, and he races over to the office of Hale Boggs, out of breath, yelling, "You've got to hear this." And he keeps playing that segment of the video film where he says, "I am a Marxist, I am a Marxist, I am a Marxist." And he just keeps playing this over and over and over again for Hale Boggs, who then picks up the phone to a guy named LBJ. And he plays it for LBJ over the phone. So here you've got this connection between Butler, and keep in mind, Oswald has not even been charged yet in the assassination of the president. This is moments after the death of JFK. He's already playing these tapes that you're hearing now for Hale Boggs, who is then in turn on the phone with LBJ. Now, Hale Boggs will be picked by LBJ for an obscure commission called the Warren Commission, which he later says he doesn't even believe himself because of the back wound that doesn't traverse. Is that your cat or something? Or?
Yeah, I was hoping it wasn't coming through. I don't know what his deal is. Probably a hairball.
No problem. Anyway, so Boggs doesn't want to be part of the Warren Commission, but LBJ famously says to him and to Chief Justice Earl Warren, "We're looking at a communist situation here which could lead to World War III." This is what Stuckey and these guys want. They want to use this thing with Oswald to paint the assassination as a communist assassination of the President of the United States, just like they did with Vanderloob, the Nazis, who was a communist, an avowed communist, during the phony Reichstag fire that Van der Lubbe was charged with and convicted in the fire. Van der Lubbe and Oswald, it's the same exact storyline. This is even what Butler says years later. Butler says the same thing. So LBJ uses this World War III nuclear war scare tactic to get Chief Justice Earl Warren to be the head of the Warren Commission. He also gets Hale Boggs on board, but Hale Boggs invites Butler to be on board. So Butler is now being asked by Boggs to come on to the Warren Commission. So that gets even weirder because there's a guy named Thomas Dodd, who is the long-term senator of the great state of Connecticut. And Dodd will call Butler behind closed doors in a subcommittee, a domestic security subcommittee, and he will learn. This is Thomas Dodd, who will be the father of Christopher Dodd in a little while. Together, the two of them were senators from like 1957 to 2010 or something. They controlled the Senate in Connecticut, these two mutts. So Thomas Dodd is a JFK hater, a Democrat, a conservative Democrat, and a virulent anti-communist. He immediately calls up LBJ, congratulates him on having successfully assassinated his predecessor, I guess. Here's the two of them together in the Senate. These guys were sewn together at the hip. Thomas Dodd was one of the most powerful senators in the United States Senate and controlled that. And then his son, Christopher Dodd, will pick up the mantle in the next generation, one of those deals, like a Bush family thing, Eric. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So Thomas Dodd gets the phone call and he calls in Butler to testify behind closed doors. But what does Butler say? This is a communist assassination. Oswald is a Marxist. Here's the tapes. In other words, the entire thing seemed to have been a game to entrap Oswald to have these tapes to frame him as the communist assassin of the president, as a patsy who's now dead, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
So yeah, this is the book by Ed Butler, Revolution is My Profession. Not so far from the truth, because what others are going to do, and that's David Atlee Phillips, who's in New Orleans for this entire thing. David Atlee Phillips will now go back to Mexico City and lay the breadcrumbs from September 28th of this same year that Oswald is in Mexico City trying to get to Havana and trying to get a visa at the embassy in Mexico City through Sylvia Duran, who will be tortured by the Mexican intelligence forces at the bequest of the CIA. And I've said this before. We were talking with Jim DiEugenio this week. We'll have that interview next week on this time slot. But Jim and I were talking about the torture of Sylvia Duran, who was the secretary at the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. And they claimed that Oswald went in there, and that's where the phony photos came from, and the phony audio tape that went to Hoover. And Hoover tells LBJ on the 23rd of November, we have a problem down in Mexico City. And the problem is that the photo doesn't match Oswald and the voice doesn't match Oswald. And LBJ says, keep me apprised of that. That is all the work of master propagandist and master CIA operative David Atlee Phillips. And David Atlee Phillips keeps going back and forth from Mexico City to New Orleans during September, October, and November to set up Lee Harvey Oswald as a guy who is trying to get to Havana to get back to the Soviet Union after killing or assassinating JFK. What they want is a full-scale invasion, again, another Bay of Pigs, this time with overwhelming military superiority to take out Castro and take out the regime and to take back the island and restore a dictator like a Batista or someone of that ilk. They're all working on this plan. Oswald is just a guy who allows them, like Van der Lubbe did in the Reichstag fire, to be the guy that the Third Reich could focus on and begin to clamp down on communism in Germany, and in this case here. So there's a lot of money at stake and a lot of big, powerful people trying to put this thing together. He will then get a job at the O'Reilly Coffee factory, which is in New Orleans. And the guy, Eustace O'Reilly, who runs the coffee factory, is also in with Oxner and Butler and Guy Banister, they're all working together. And yet Oswald has a job greasing the gears, so to speak, and these giant silos that have coffee in them, these grinders, these big grinders, and the coffee will come out of Central and South America into New Orleans. This O'Reilly guy, Eustace O'Reilly, will send a lot of his employees. They will graduate from there and go to an odd job at NASA. They will go to the NASA jobs right from there. And Oswald may have been, if he had lived, might have been sent to NASA. NASA was another holding area of these anti-communists, kind of like the agriculture department was for LBJ, of putting his stooges in there. They used NASA for this stuff back in the day also. So there's a whole anti-communist group down there in New Orleans that's working together to try to undermine communism in Florida and New Orleans. Now in southern, around Lake Pontchartrain, are these bases where David Ferry is involved with training anti-Castro Cubans for a second invasion of the island. That's where they break into certain arms depot down there, and they get weaponry. The money's being funded through Murchison and others to get weapons for these Cubans for what I'm calling Bay of Pigs 2. You know, this was a second Bay of Pigs. David Atlee Phillips was a Kennedy hater because he physically trained these troops down in southern Louisiana to invade the island of Cuba. And they were slaughtered or imprisoned by Castro. Castro will later trade hundreds of these Cubans for money from the Kennedy administration, money and medical supplies. And they got quite a bit of money and quite a bit of medical supplies in the prisoner exchange out of Cuba. So what else do these guys do? Butler works on making a film called Hitler in Havana, which I'd love to find someday. Hitler in Havana is something that the New York Times reviewed it and called it an affront to journalism. You know, it's a propaganda film about Castro being like Hitler. The New York Times, obviously no friend of the right, nevertheless gave it a scathingly negative review. But they would fund these things. That's what Frawley was involved in. Frawley was involved in the funding of Hitler in Havana. These people were involved in funding different these things, like these truth tapes that were going out of New Orleans, that were being sent out, these radio shows they were doing. Inca exists even into the 1990s. Inca exists, Eric. It goes for over 30 years, you know, with Butler running this organization, or he was the director of it. The founder and president of it was Alton Oxnard. Anyway, what you're seeing here is the whole group together in one episode. Here's a shot of Oxnard on the right, Clay Shaw on the left. All of these guys were in bed together. And you could say, well, they knew each other, they were friends. They were conspirators in a way because they were trying to frame someone in the assassination of JFK that would allow them to launch a major scaled invasion of Cuba, and also these smaller victories over the communist regimes around the world, which is also what they were concerned with.
I did find Hitler in Havana. One copy left on Amazon.
Okay, let's get it. Let's get it.
Right.
Let's get it.
We could put it on Locals, maybe.
Okay. So let me see if you have any photos of my friends there. I have a couple of photos. Oh, I wanted you to show that photo of him passing out the flyers at the Trade Mart. The first photo, the one that's most common, of Oswald in front of the Trade Mart.
With Rafael Cruz, that one?
Yeah, with Ted Cruz's father. Now, this is the most common photo. This is Oswald smiling for the camera. To the right of him is Ted Cruz's father. What he's doing there is subject to debate. He will later flee to Canada. He will later then flee Canada, leave his family behind. Little Cruz Jr., and he will go to the oil fields in Texas. Ted Cruz is dead right there. Rafael Cruz. However, if you look to the guy who's got his back to you with the white shirt. The guy who's got his back to you with the white shirt. Over his right shoulder, I'm going to show you something in the next photo, which is a photo that I found about 10 years ago, which may explain a lot. If you could find that other marked up photo that I have, this is my handwriting on it.
Hang on, I've got
I
got 2 copies, and I tried to blow things up and whatnot to see if we can.
Well, the one that's okay, yeah, I don't know. Okay, so let me explain. This is my photo here. This is, if you go to the tippy top, the guy on the up and back of the guy with his back to you, that is Ed Butler. Why Ed Butler is there when he's passing out these handbills? If you scroll down a little bit, just scroll, you'll see Ed Butler with a woman there going over the flyer with the sunglasses on. That's Ed Butler, by the way. Then no one's ever connected Ed Butler to the passing out of the flyers. Now, I think that he was overseeing this operation as to why he's there. This is a phony operation involving Ted Cruz's dad and Lee Harvey Oswald and Edward Scannell Butler. No one's ever made these connections before I did. So Ed Butler is there. If you scroll down a little further, you will see that guy in the white suit in the back, all the way in the back on the left-hand side, the tie with a complete white suit. That is Clay Shaw, my friends. And he is coming back from lunch to enter the International Trade Mart. So you now have in one photo, Lee Harvey Oswald, Ted Cruz's father, Ed Butler, Clay Shaw. And if you scroll down a little further, that, my friends, is Bill Stuckey. Now, Bill Stuckey right there is the host, and that's Ed Butler on the left. William Stuckey is the radio journalist who's the host of Latin Listening Post, who's another CIA Operation Mockingbird journalist. So these photos here link everyone together into one cabal, which I've always found out to be very interesting. Now that is, what else would I wanted to show you? Oh yeah, there's another, there's one, we've seen that with Rafael Cruz. Yeah, so anyway, so this cabal right here links everyone into one happy family, I think, and that was a staged event. This is just the passing out of the flyers. The fight would bring gear will be a staged event. Oswald will sit in the black section of the courtroom again, as he always does when he's riding on a segregated bus. He will sit in the black section of the bus. He will later sit in the black lunchroom in the Texas School Book Depository. He does the same things repeatedly throughout his short life. He's 23 years old at this point. And let's see if you have any other photos of interest for us. You did Phillips, you got Banister,
Oshner, Chris Dodd, but who cares?
Okay, so Hale Boggs will become of interest because
that's
he will
pretty near with
that's pretty near with Ed Butler. That's a good photo. Boggs himself will become the House Majority Leader in 1971. He will become one of the opponents quietly of the Warren Commission, and his big beef is that shallow shot in the back right of JFK's back, and Ford helps him out by moving the autopsy photo to the back of JFK's neck and says, see, you got a problem now? So Boggs wanted to dissent in writing. From what we understand, according to Jim DiEugenio and others, he was going to dissent in writing against the Warren Commission and not make it unanimous. But LBJ talked him out of it, and he was not a happy camper. He will later, 1971, become House Majority Leader, and in 1972, he will die in a plane crash just a year later, the plane not being ever found, nor his body ever found, Hale Boggs.
Going back to the event real quickly, is it possible that you were looking at something similar to pro wrestling where Oswald was the heel? And, I mean, because it's such a nice setup. They're passing out the flyers, then they have a fight. So you have Oswald being the, pro wrestling heel or the bad guy set up. And then coincidentally, then they have a radio debate to just get this conversation.
Well, I don't know
going.
if it has anything to do with wrestling, but it is the whole thing's a setup. So, I mean, they are theatrically, but this is role playing that CIA does and all kinds of intelligence operations do, regardless of wrestling or not. But yeah, I mean, he he is on a mission to do certain things here. I mean, again, he will work for Guy Banister. The flyers that he has say Lee H. Oswald, 544 Camp Street. Why do we know 544 Camp Street? Because that's the office of Guy Banister. Guy Banister's office will be visited by David Atlee Phillips. It is a fundraising and arms raising office where Jeeps outside are being loaded with equipment to be driven south of Louisiana to these bases right there in the heart of the intelligence center of New Orleans. Oswald is up there. David Phillips is up there. Guy Banister is up there. This is what they're all doing up there. So when Guy Banister's secretary comes in and says Lee Oswald is down on Canal Street passing out flyers, he laughs, Guy Banister, because that's one of his operations. Guy Banister will also send Oswald in to infiltrate the pro-Castro student movement in Tulane and Loyola universities, Eric. I mean, he had numerous jobs for Guy Banister. Guy Banister reported up the ladder to Clay Shaw, reported up the ladder to basically to David Phillips, who, as they said, was coming out of Washington, D.C. The famous files of Guy Banister, when he dies, somehow end up in the hands of Ed Butler. And those files are subpoenaed by Jim Garrison for his investigation. So what does Ed Butler do? He airmails them overnight to California, and he flees New Orleans for California. And when Jim Garrison issues a subpoena for the files in California, and also Ed Butler, Ronald Reagan, who is a friend of Frawley and a political recipient of Frawley's money, denies the subpoena and turning over the documents to Jim Garrison. And that's referred to, this happens to Jim Garrison in a couple of states, but Reagan will not extradite the files, and they won't extradite Butler to be subject to Garrison's investigation. Frawley is a guy that supports both the political campaigns of Reagan and also Richard Nixon.
Amazing.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of tentacles here. I hope people could follow this because this involves a lot of tentacles, a lot of
here's
dots.
Another shot that we overlooked that you probably want to go over. Clay Shaw in this box.
This is Clay Shaw and General Thrasher on the Clay Shaw on the upper right, second from the right. That's Clay Shaw doing military intelligence World War II, and that's General Thrasher, who was he was an attaché to Thrasher, where he's making his bones here in Europe and Italy, I think it is. But there's a shot of Garrison in his uniform, which I found good, with his kids. I don't know if you still have that one. In Oklahoma, I forget the name of it was Fort something or Slip or Sip. Yeah, here it is.
Fort Sill.
Fort Sill. Okay, yeah. That's that kid on the left was played by Oliver Stone's son in the movie. He's grown up a little bit there. But that's Garrison in his National Guard uniform and his three boys there, which it's another rare photo that I hadn't seen in a long time. There's also one of there's one of Oxner with Donovan. Did you see that photo? There's one of Donovan, because it's all kind of connected. Like Donovan's connected to this. Phillips is connected to this. Lansdale is connected to this. Everybody, all the roads meet down in New Orleans. There's a photo of Oxner and Donovan that I love. There's also one of Bill Boxley, to show you how odd Bill Boxley looks. Bill Brochure, or whatever his name was. Yeah, there's the one of Donovan and Oxner. I always found that to be interesting.
And yeah, Will Wood, Bill Boxley was in the movie as the guy who betrayed Garrison at the airport.
Right. Well, he also stole the files and turned them over to the FBI. But again, the threat always was nuclear war. The threat always was, we know this guy was a communist. We can't let this information out. That was always the threat by intelligence to these people they were trying to manipulate. We know who these people are. We know what they're trying to do. Don't be on the wrong side of history. Help us get this thing straightened out. We know that Oswald didn't act alone, but we have to frame it that way to make this work. Don't make this work worse for us. We don't want to go to World War III. which is what privately LBJ was saying to the people who he wanted to manipulate.
Well, yeah, and I kind of feel like he was like, okay, I'm in. Can we drop it?
Yeah, and that's not that far-fetched. I mean, again, when you listen to the audio tape of him with Earl Warren, convincing him to put his uniform back on like it's World War II, and we don't want 160 million Americans to die in 30 seconds in a nuclear exchange. Do you, sir? Do you? I mean, it's so heavy-handed what he does to Earl Warren. I think Earl Warren almost broke down crying because he didn't want to be part of any kind of commission. I mean, imagine John Roberts, if Supreme Court chief now, if they picked John Roberts to be the head of the Roberts Commission. You know, I'm sure he wouldn't be too happy about it.
Yeah, I'm sure he regretted that posting.
Now, it's weird because actually the mastermind, you know, the whole thing about the soliloquy by Donald Sutherland as Mr. X in JFK, it's really not about Lansdale as much as it is about David Atlee Phillips, because David Atlee Phillips brags about overthrowing Arbenz in Guatemala. David Atlee Phillips was the guy involved with overthrowing Mossadegh in Iran and putting in the Shah. It was David Atlee Phillips who did these things, and they conflate it to Lansdale. And that's what Prouty just kept beating that Lansdale hammer over and over and over again when it's really David Atlee Phillips who did all this stuff.
Almost like a Hunter guy maybe being replaced with some other name.
Yeah.
Current day.
Yep. Now, I mean, so anyway, so you got all these weird things happening at the same time. But look, the proof's in the pudding. I mean, LBJ, once he seized power, he didn't want to invade Cuba because he already had the prize that he sought. He didn't need any more trouble than he already had. So he put the kibosh on that, and then he gave them in Presidential Action, National Security Action Memo 273, gives them the Vietnam War, which is their booby prize. And that's, you know, something that grows and grows and grows. But they really wanted the invasion of Cuba. They really did want to take out Castro. And, you know, they do hook up with the mob. They do hook up with Johnny Roselli. They do hook up with various mobsters. It doesn't mean that they were involved in the killing of Kennedy. They were contracted to kill Castro.
Crazy. So what ultimately happened with Ed Butler after he fled to California with the file?
Nothing. He hid out there, and he wouldn't be extradited. He didn't come back until many years later. He was involved. Like I said, Dodd invited him to testify before the House. It was the equivalent of the Senate subcommittee, like the House Un-American Activities Committee. And, you know, he was involved in working behind the scenes with Hal Boggs on the Warren Commission, Eric, on the Warren Commission. But he continued to be an anti-communist fighter for many years until the collapse of the Soviet Union. That's how long he did this for.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah, no, it's an amazing story. I mean, he's involved with all these guys. But what I'm just focusing on the 1963 version of this. He will attempt to undermine the Garrison and Clay Shaw trial because Clay Shaw is a personal friend of his. Don't forget, William Bryan will show up out of California after the Sirhan case and show them how to choose a jury. If we recall in the book The Chosen, Eric, by William J. Bryan, they show the Clay Shaw defense how to handpick the jury. Bryan does, who invented jury selection, also worked with F. Lee Bailey on the Boston Strangler case, invented jury selection, essentially, William J. Bryan.
Somebody in the chat saying that Ed Butler started a newspaper in, I guess, L.A. called Aware, blaming Sharon Tate murder on the Black Panthers and the New Left.
I wouldn't be surprised, but that I don't know about. Yeah, 1969. It could be.
Well, I mean, New Left. I mean, if he's like, "Hey, it's a commies," say, look.
Yeah. I don't think he differentiated.
I
don't think he differentiated. He had a long career of an anti-communist. You know. So we're just trying to focus on the Oswald connection to him. You know what I mean? And Clint Murkison and some of these other guys.
Yeah, it's just crazy combo. All right. Well, any more on this, or do you want to check out some super chats?
Yeah, no, you could check out the super chats. They might have some questions about this, that we could answer.
All right. Well, the first super chat has nothing to do with this. The Lone Gunman podcast accused your show of ripping them off in the first 90 seconds of their last podcast.
Who?
Why so spicy?
Who?
I saw this. It came in before the show.
Who are they?
There's a podcast called the Lone Gunman podcast.
Okay.
I did find it, and I found a show, and there's like a micro clip where you stated that, oh God, we were just talking about him. The
David
guy,
Atlee Phillips?
Not David Atlee Phillips, but Mr. X, who Mr. X is.
Fletcher Prouty?
Yeah, that Fletcher Prouty was a maniac, Scientologist, etc.
Well, I didn't say he was a maniac. I said he was a Scientologist.
No, but you said this guy's a maniac. He was a Scientologist, but it was just off the cuff statement.
Oh, okay.
And they pulled this. There's this little snippet and an Oscar Wilde quote that they say the imitation is the sincerest form of flattery.
I've never even heard of these people.
I know. I really don't understand it. And honestly, I wouldn't watch it because it's the Lone Gunman podcast.
Who gives a shit about these people? Let's move on. Fuck these people. Are you kidding me?
All right. George Erickson, 60 years after Kennedy's assassinations, with all the compelling facts available, these artificial intelligence models are biased and programmed to give only the Warren Commission position white. Because the mainstream press is dominating the coverage, and the AI is trained from the mainstream press.
Well, I was rewatching the Musk Tucker interview the other night, and Musk talks about how the politics of San Francisco are essentially AI, and how he talks about the debate that he had with his friend at Google, Larry Page, how he cut him off, and like Larry Page is a megalomaniac trying for world domination of AI, but for that matter, what Musk says is the thing is biased, and it's a lying machine, because if you look at political incorrectness as a lie, what they've created at Google is an automated lying machine, according to Musk. Which I hadn't heard this interview in a number of months, but I went back and I watched it, and he talks about that obviously the AI is the most dangerous thing ever invented, because he says that if like these agencies like the Food and Drug Administration were created out of calamity, they were created out of something going bad. If we wait to have regulation on AI, we may never be able to regulate it after something goes bad. And he means really bad. That's the whole point of what Musk has been banging the alarm about with AI.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Musk has been afraid of AI for a long time.
Legitimately, yeah.
But of course, as he answered, he stated one of my favorite things. You've heard of Occam's razor, right? He has a variant that I'm going to call the ironic razor. And essentially he said that kind of like Occam's razor, no matter what, the outcome will truly be ironic. And
right, yeah.
And his example of this was who invented or who created the company OpenAI, which is behind ChatGPT.
Right.
Elon Musk.
Right.
Was one of the co-founders.
Yeah.
So there you go.
He blames himself. He says that this thing got out of control. That's why he was dealing with Larry Page every week, trying to rein it in. And then Larry Page told him to go F himself after a while, because he held all the cards, Eric, right? At Google.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, the Imaginarium. Mark, you were asking about a woke dictionary when talking to Viva. James Lindsay built one on his website, New Discourses. Invite him to talk with the lawyers, Eric. He's a genius. I'm familiar with James Lindsay. He's a big player in anti-critical race theory, anti-woke stuff, things like that. Like, he's been on the case since Rufo, before even Rufo.
Let me reiterate this again for the 90th time. I'm talking about a physical dictionary of woke terminology, like the urban slang dictionaries that came out in the 90s. Some of them actually put out by the New York Times. That's what I'm physically talking about.
Okay, well, I would say that's an impossibility, because they'd have to reprint it every 2 days.
Again, I don't disagree. I don't disagree. I'm just saying that this is my wishful thinking. I don't disagree. The same thing happened with living language with hip hop. I mean, they had to change certain lingos, but there were physical dictionaries. I mean, hip hop changed also, Eric.
Dustin Russell had to bribe a group of misfit nursing home patients to form a super convoy of walkers to get home in time for the show.
That's funny. That's funny.
I always love Dustin's fill-in. By the way, while we're talking about Dustin, he is going to be at the live show in Youngstown coming up in March. Now, I wanted to really stress the Youngstown meetup because I just found out some troubling news today. Apparently, there is a high school wrestling state championship going on the same weekend, and hotels are going quickly. So if you guys want to go to the meetup and you need a hotel, I really encourage you to book everything now. It is going to be a bad idea to wait, or you may have to be staying out of town. I really recommend booking it all right now while there's things available of any kind. Hopefully we can beat some of those crazy ass parents with their dumb bumper stickers on their cars.
That being said, there's cities are very close by.
There are.
Right. I mean, within driving distance. It's not the end of the world. I mean, there are places outside of Youngstown as well. I'm not even staying in Youngstown. I think I'm staying outside of Youngstown. So there are different places to stay. But how many wrestlers can there be?
It's a state championship. Ohio's got a lot of people.
Okay, we'll see what happens. But speaking of AI, you dropped the part 2 of the Oswald AI yesterday.
I did, and some of what we just covered today is part of part 2 of the Oswald audio drama, correct?
Right. No. That's why I wanted to do this episode, because I think it ties in with where we are in part 2 of the Oswald AI series. So there are going to be some interesting things covered in there that are relevant to this today.
Yes, and if you guys want to check out parts 1 and 2 of the Oswald scripted audio drama, it is on our locals. It is an exclusive for local supporters who support annually. There's going to be 3 more parts after this, and then after that will be at least the first part of the LBJ.
Yeah. Here's a quiz. What do Oswald and CIA Director John Brennan have in common? The answer is Gus Hall. Oswald sent an honorary Fair Play for Cuba committee membership card to Gus Hall, and John Brennan voted for Gus Hall as president of the United States. So there is a quiz question for you guys there that you may want to astonish your friends about with John Brennan and Oswald.
Perfect. And again, unstructured.locals.com has the scripted audio drama. Also, if you are a paid supporter on unstructured.locals.com and you want to do the meetup, there's a very heavy discount for both the VIP meetup and the live show meetup on the following day.
Okay, so are there VIP tickets left, or they're gone?
They're going quickly. They're going quickly.
The VIP ones. Okay, but there's still the main event.
Yes, on Sunday.
On Sunday. Okay, that's the bigger of the 2 shows, right?
Correct.
Right.
VIP is definitely much smaller, more exclusive. Tickets are going quickly. I foresee that selling out before too long.
Right. And that's like March 16th, you're saying?
March 16th for Saturday. I think that's March 16th, but it is the Saturday in March, closest to the 16th. And then Sunday, I believe the 17th in March.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to try to cover Watergate if we can. I'm going to try to get my ducks in a row about Watergate, because it's in March of '74 that things really started to take off. It's the 50th anniversary. Obviously, the break-in was in '72, but the events, court-wise and legal-wise, begin to happen in March of '74. So we're going to do a live show about Watergate and any connection it may have to Ohio. Maybe Dennis Kucinich can come by and tell us a little bit about it as an independent.
He's running for Congress.
As an independent candidate. Maybe he should go on the libertarian ticket, Eric. I mean,
we'll be talking about that on Friday.
Oh, on Friday. Yeah, we'll get into that.
There's also a hearing that's coming up on Thursday. We'll be talking about on Friday of Mr. Alec Baldwin.
Oh, boy.
on the first. Kim Upperman, love you guys. Keep preaching the truth. Truth unifies. Truth divides.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. Yeah, I was on with Viva the other day talking about E.G. Carroll, which we found a couple of downloads of the PDF of some rare books that Eric has uncovered of Carroll that are on the locals website there.
Along with a book from David Atlee Phillips, is a good chunk of money.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. These are rare. I mean, the book that they put up there is on Amazon is $1,500, which I didn't have out of pocket. So somehow we got a PDF of that. But that's one of the benefits of being a locals member, is to get these rare books that most people can't afford. You know, these books like E.G. Carroll's book for $1,500. I mean, maybe Trump has a copy.
Maybe. I'm not your buddy guy. So
oh yeah, he was on the other show. It's the same people. I mean, Viva called me an hour before the show. I was in my underwear putting tar on my roof, as I usually do on Sunday, and I figured I'd help out the cause because I think Barnes was doing something else.
Yeah, your football team already lost, right?
So yeah, I was done. I didn't give a shit. I TiVoed both games. The Packers were done anyway, so I just glad to see the stupidity of a Detroit coach losing the game for him. When one man loses a game for an entire team, boy, that's got to hurt. That's really got to hurt.
Dick Dickerson gifted 10 America's Untold Stories memberships, which we really appreciate. That's like a $50 gift he's giving to other people. And that's a great way of, helping people check it out, spread the word, things like that. And it helps support the show. So thank you very much, Dick. BTK with a super sticker. Thank you very much.
Right on.
Jason Willis has been a member for 3 months and said, Fanny is not my relative.
What did I say she was last week or something? I think I might have made a joke.
You might have.
I might have. Yeah.
Well, no,
it's clearly his
Mickey is
his uncle is Bruce Willis, and most people know that who are in the industry.
Or Mickey, who did The Awakening, right?
That I don't know, but Bruce Willis is probably more famous.
Yeah, and sadly not long for John Hyde. Never trust a guy who smokes a pipe.
Well, Garrison smoked a pipe too, so I don't know.
Oh, good point.
Yeah. There's a lot of people smoke pipes. I don't know if you can, that's like a blanket statement.
All right. And Pasha, I continue to be amazed at the level of detail of which you have command, Mark. Kudos. My level of detail is whether I ate lunch today or not. I did.
Okay. Well, it's many podcasts I rip off to get this knowledge. I just spend my free time looking at Lone Nut podcasts to get this information. Randy H with $10. Thank you. Mm-hmm. George Erickson said that he Venmo'd you some JFK book cash. Thank you. That's helpful. I mean, these books, I look, they're sending me books. I don't even have room for the books I have, but there's books that I want, like this Butler book, which I'm getting today, but there's books that are very rare, and sometimes we find the PDFs. It all helps, yeah. Yeah. And then when we find the PDFs, we try to share it back out again with locals, so that way we can spread the love a little bit. And thanks for the support. Adam Sipke or Sipsy, $4.99. Thank you very much. It's great. I started to watch the Oswald Part 2 last night, and you could just click the script below it and read as you're hearing it. It's really user friendly, I think, would be the phrase, right? I mean, I think so. And we put in more of the sound effects. Well, there's the Foley's in there now, but more of the narration stating how it's going to flow so people can visualize it as a film. Right. One woman started crying. She said she started sobbing. Yeah, I saw that, which is that's very cool. That's very cool. So, but speaking of locals, we are going to head over there. Normally, Oswald would make an appearance, but we have to suffer with the substandard. That's a disc. What happened to his eyes? You poked his eyes out? Oh, there's his eyes. Okay, I thought you poked his eyes out. Oh, it's a Groubert. Well, you just can't trust these bears. Right. What do you want? Like, he's a cocaine bear. He's a cocaine bear. There you go. So I just want to give a we'll talk about it on locals about Christopher Dodd, but we'll get over that. Yeah. Sounds good. Everybody, follow us over to locals. There's a link in the description on Rumble, a link in the description on YouTube. You can always just go to unstructured.locals.com. It's going to be the link at the top here, wherever you are coming from. And we will see you there soon.